Let's stay with this subject now and speak to Thembelani Mazibuko, Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, senior researcher. Thank you so much, Thembelani, for your time. I mean, before we even look at some of the implications of what we just heard and what we've been seeing, let's start with the noteworthy performances of different political parties across the country.
Yes, indeed. So your small new kids on the blocks, primarily the MK party in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the Patriotic Alliance in the Western Cape, did quite well. They've made inroads and have taken the votes of your bigger political parties. So those two parties have done quite well. With regards to the three big parties, the ANC, the EFF, and the DA, they have very much a mixed bag of results. They have some areas where they would be happy about, whereas in other areas, in other by-elections, they will be disappointed with the outcome. For example, like your reporter mentioned in the Western Cape, the DA would be disappointed with some of the by-election results in Theavaterskloof and George, but they'll be very happy with what happened in Ekurhuleni, where they won 87% of the vote. So a mixed bag of results, but the winners, no doubt about it, the Patriotic Alliance as well as the MK party.
I'm going to get to the MK party in just a moment. So staying in the Western Cape, then how much of an insecure position would you say this puts, the Democratic Alliance, which has been, the party with an outright majority there?
Yeah, so the DA's fortunes have fallen in the Western Cape from 2014 to 2019, from a high of 59% to 54.5% in 2019. And by all indications, this will continue to tumble down. Now, the question is, will it lose its outright majority in the Western Cape? It's hard. It's very difficult to know for sure. But here's what we do know, is that the DA needs to do very well in the city of Cape Town. A lot of people may not realize, but 2 in every 3 voters in the Western Cape resides in the city of Cape Town, 64%. And that is in many ways the DA's voter base. So they need to do well in the suburbs of the Western Cape, the southern suburbs, the northern suburbs, the Atlantic seaboard, and they will do well. They also then need to do well in the municipalities adjacent to the Western Cape, the Cape Winelands. But then when you go further out of the Western Cape, is where the DA is starting to have some issues. In the central Karoo, areas like Barefoot West, the Patriotic Alliance are making real inroads. In the Southern Cape as well, we saw yesterday in George, the Patriotic Alliance gained over 50% of the votes, and the DA collapsed in some ways. But at the same time, I would not write off the DA winning an outright majority, because of the grip they have within the city of Cape Town, as well as surrounding municipalities like Drakenstein, Swartland, Stellenbosch. So those voters will come out of the Democratic Alliance. But the issue is, yes.
Pardon me, Thembelani, quite an interesting picture you're painting there. So I'm keen then to hear your thoughts on what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, you think about how the MK party, a new kid on the block, as some have described it, has, really just seemed to be making some interesting, findings, in fact, some interesting ground in places like Kupongolo, for example, and you look at some of the areas in KwaZulu-Natal. So what does this then mean for a political party like the IFP that looks to regain lost ground, the ANC that looks that wants to retain power, the EFF that then wants to win an outright majority?
Yeah, so of all the provinces that where we are seeing the effects of a smaller party, I think it is definitely KwaZulu-Natal. So the MK party is a very interesting party. In many ways, it is the headline of these upcoming elections. In Vryheid last week, they won 19%, and now yesterday they won 28%. So they clearly do have some resonance. I personally am from KwaZulu-Natal, and when I was home during the Christmas break, there was no question that there was certainly some support for MK, organic support for MK party on the ground. The interesting question that we have to ask is, where is MK getting their support from? And looking at the by-election results, it's clear that they are getting support, A, from the ANC, as well as from the IFP. And there is going to be another by-election again next week, although in Mpumalanga, and it'll be interesting to see if this trend continues. But yeah, KwaZulu-Natal really is really up in the air. And judging from the elections, especially in Newcastle, where the ANC really did poorly, they got 15% from a high of the 60s in the ward that they were contesting in 2006. It's clear that in KwaZulu-Natal, the ANC does have some work to do in order to win an outright majority. And the majority of the voters are going to both the MK party as well as the Inkatha Freedom Party. The EFF, for its part, would be disappointed with the results in KwaZulu-Natal. Notwithstanding their manifesto launch last week, they are not really making the inroads that they would have hoped to have made. For example, in Newcastle, in Ward 11, they went from 24% in the elections to yesterday's by-election of 12%. So the EFF does have some work to do, whereas the MK party, as new as it is gaining traction quite fast.
So what are we reading then into it, I mean, Thembelani, because you think about the fact that right now, there are some political parties who are also looking at KwaZulu-Natal as the battleground. It's one of them. It's one of the many of the few battlegrounds that we're going to be seeing in this particular election. So what should we be reading into these inroads that are being made by the MK party in context of that?
Yeah, so what we can clearly make is that there is a fragmentation of politics in KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal is an interesting province because it's the one province out of two that was not won by the ANC in 1994. One being the Western Cape, which was won by the National Party, the new National Party outright. The other is KwaZulu-Natal, which won it in 1994, although they did lose it in 1999. So what do we get? So the IFP has always had a base in KwaZulu-Natal, especially in the more northern KwaZulu-Natal. So what we're seeing now is that there is a new kid on the block, the MK party. They are now also making inroads. And the big reason, perhaps the only reason that the MK is making these kinds of inroads is because they are backed by a leader who is still quite popular in KwaZulu-Natal. Without the backing of the former president, Jacob Zuma, the MK party would not be making these kinds of inroads. So what we're seeing is a fragmentation between the IFP, which has always been a political force, and then the ANC faithful, but now the new kid on the block is the MK party, which draws its support both from the ANC as expected, because in many ways it is an ANC project. It was started because of an unhappiness with the presidency, with the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa. So you would expect them to get support from the ANC. Also because of how the former president is being perceived to have been treated by this ANC. So we're seeing a fragmentation. There has been a fragmentation, but also the MK backing of the former president, who has latent support in the province, and as a result, we are seeing this fragmentation.
Quite an interesting, picture you are painting for us there, Thembelani. And let's see then what happens as these political parties. I mean, the EFF started last week. The ANC is next in line to launch its manifesto in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. The IFP is going to be doing the same. So it's going to be very interesting to watch, what happens post that and what happens even during that particular time. But thank you so much for those insights. Do appreciate them.